Now, we have a group here, Palestine Action, a group that has not attacked anyone, yet we're currently at a stage where it could be prescribed. Palestine Action have been active for almost 5 years now, and they've done all matter of direct action aimed at ending UK complicity in Israeli apartheid and today genocide.
Right.
But there's one event in particular that set this prescription process into motion. Could you walk us through what happened?
I mean, I would actually go back and say, kind of groups like Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and many other Zionist groups have been calling on the UK government for a while now to proscribe Palestine Action. This doesn't come out of the blue.
Right.
There's been a consistent campaign by Zionist groups to block Palestine Action. And, just for a bit more context, Palestine Action is a group that is trying to shut down Elbit Systems. So that's the focus. Elbit Systems is a weapons manufacturer that produces drones and quadcopters and other parts for Israeli machinery of violence that's used in Gaza right now. A quadcopter, for instance, is a drone-like machine that flies around. It's got a machine gun attached to it. It emits the sounds of women and children screaming to lure Palestinian adults out into the open, because they're looking for whoever it is that's crying so that they can rescue them. And then once they're out in the open, it shoots them down in the streets. So that's how evil these machines are. Palestine Action have made it their goal to shut down Elbit Systems, because the vast majority of military-grade drones that come to Israel come from Elbit Systems directly. They have a range of tactics, one of which is just simply to stand on the roof of the factory, because the law in the UK is that if somebody's on the roof of a factory, nobody's permitted to be on the factory floor. So they'll occupy that roof sometimes days or weeks on end in order to stop production. It's a very effective tactic that they use in order to slow down the machinery of violence. But what they've also done is lowered themselves into the factory to actually smash up the drones themselves. So allegedly, if you look at kind of groups like the Filton 18, allegedly they went into a factory and they smashed up the drones and the quadcopters themselves. So this is the kind of activity that they've been involved in, right? Stopping the machinery of violence leaving the UK and getting into the Israeli occupation forces' hands, which is then being used in Gaza. So they're directly saving lives by doing these actions. They've also targeted all those organizations and industries that support Elbit Systems in different ways, whether it's the landlords, it's Barclays Bank, other different companies that provide parts to Elbit Systems, whatever it might be. But they've done their research about what Elbit Systems' industrial ecosystem is, and they target that ecosystem as well. They ensure that ecosystem understands that there is a consequence to supporting Elbit Systems. And of course, the larger context is a genocide. That's what's really at stake here. They're trying to stop a genocide. So the criminal damage that is taking place is to stop that genocide. Now, coming finally to your question about what they did most recently, about a week ago, just a bit more than a week ago, they broke into an RAF facility, which is of course a high security military base, and they spray painted some, I think it was F-35 jets. I might be wrong about what the jets were, but they were jets that were effectively being used by the British RAF to provide logistical support for the Zionists. Now, all they did was paint these planes. They didn't actually damage them in any way, but they sent a message that we believe that these planes are being used for this purpose. The purpose which, by the way, the ICJ has said that there's a plausible genocide taking place in Gaza.
That was early 2024.
That was early 2024. But still, to this day, the British government is still playing a role, by effectively not paying attention to that judgment by the ICJ. Now they are being accused of terrorism, right? Which is where the prescription comes in. But we would argue that any criminal damage is actually amelioration. In fact, amelioration is a defense. To improve something is a defense. And I would argue that very, very strongly, that actually what they're doing is obeying the highest standards of law, right? Rather than being involved in criminality. They're trying to uphold the law at its highest ethical level. That's what Palestine Action does. And Martin Luther King Jr. Spoke about this, wrote about this in his letter from Birmingham jail. And this was from the march on Selma, or from Selma. He said that the highest respect that one can show for the law is to disobey a law that is unconscionable, right? And that is what Palestine Action do. They understand, inherently understand that, criminal damage would be in any other circumstance something that's wrong. You don't go and just smash up other people's property, right? It's like that's their property. But what if that property is being used as part of a genocide? Then doesn't the highest moral authority and the highest legal authority tell us that to stop that from being used for the what's considered international law to be the highest crime, the greatest crime, genocide? There is nothing that sits above genocide in the canon of crimes, international crimes that exist. And so this form of direct action, I would argue, is the highest respect for the law, not criminal in any way whatsoever. But of course, they're now being reframed because they broke into an RAF base as being a terrorist organization, which we have to push back against.
Surely the question when it comes to the RAF base should be asked to how activists on e-scooters were able to bypass RAF security as opposed to prescribing this particular group.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's probably going to be like a massive crackdown on their security protocol and whatever else, right? But that's actually by the by. Like, there are people who work on those bases who are also watching the same news as the rest of us. I would argue, why is Palestine Action breaking in there in the first place? Who are all these workers who are complicit in the ongoing genocide by fixing the planes, by being engineers on the planes, by doing all of these like actions that keep these planes going in support of a genocide? I think it's the responsibility of those on the base to do what Palestine Action is doing. Why is Palestine Action having to break into the base? The people on the base themselves who have a conscience, who have a sense of morality, or should do, they should be the ones who are stopping the planes from leaving in the first place. And of course, our government should be the first to lead the charge on that if they want to respect international law. But there is no respect for international law. International law is a broken system. But hopefully, one day, inshallah, what we will find is that those who have been complicit, and I hope Keir Starmer will be in that group, will find themselves before a court of some variety.
Now, with regards to Palestine Action, they're not like a normal organization with an address and an email and directors. It's kind of a loose network of sorts, right? So it's more of an idea.
Right.
So how exactly is prescribing this group going to get rid of this idea?
It's not. It's not at all. Because the idea is direct action, and you can't prescribe direct action, right? So at some point, I would hope other groups would emerge to do exactly the same thing that Palestine Action are doing, if Palestine Action is a prescribed organization and no longer exists. And this is the thing. Keir Starmer has to understand, and Vet Cooper has to understand that what they are doing right now is exactly what the government did at the time of the suffragettes. They are the modern day repressive force. The suffragettes, who were considered terrorists, who were considered to be extremists, who were considered to be this, that, and the other, who are now celebrated. We teach the suffragette movement. But these were women who were willing to like blow up factories and smash windows and throw themselves in front of horses in order to make their case plain for the larger public. This is, if Keir Starmer wants to understand who he is right now, he has to understand that he is the same repressive force that would have stopped the suffragette movement. This type of direct action does not go away. especially not in times of extreme structural violence. And that's what we're living through. There is no structural violence greater than genocide. And so I would imagine if the government is successful in prescribing Palestine action, direct action will continue. And, Cage International will be there to support all those, inshallah, who are involved in direct action in any way, and to help, ensure that it is a right that is protected.
Apart from the Zionist lobby and Israeli lobby money, what do you think motivates the British government at this stage to support genocide and criminalize opposition to genocide?
It's a good question. I think we've seen the start of some public narratives where they're recognizing that things have gone too far. So there is this now attempt to try and make sure that they're not criminalized later for the role that they've played by effectively, saying, oh, well, the Netanyahu regime's gone too far. It's not Zionist. They're trying to rescue Zionism from itself. My colleague Frank McGuinness, he always talks about the terminal crisis of Zionism. Zionism is in terminal crisis right now. But you see the machinery of state at both political and media level, that they are attempting to rescue Zionism from itself because they see how deranged it is. And they're trying to minimize that violence to Netanyahu, to senior members of his regime, and trying to protect Zionism as a construct because they're implicated by it. So they have to now go all in, but they have to do it in a way where they protect their colonial outpost, as much as they possibly can because of all the interests that they have in relation to it.
Yeah, I mean, they're speaking out of both sides of the mast. I think that's the expression, right? They blame Netanyahu and then they sanction Smotrich and Ben Gvir, two individuals who have no interest in leaving the West Bank.
Right. Right.
And yet they've never stopped the spy flights leaving from Akrotiri.
Right.
They try to distract us with these sanctions and these statements, and with the so-called 8% deduction in arms trade or whatever it was, and yet they're still complicit. Do you really think that they believe they'll actually get away with it?
I mean, I think they believe they will. Yeah, but the arc of history is long, and it bends towards justice. And I believe that at some point, as Umar al-Laqad says, everyone will say that they were against this, right? And that's how liberals operate. They're entirely involved in the structure of violence. They are completely complicit in it. They will maintain it. They will support it. They will do everything they can to be part of it until the point that it becomes completely beyond the pale. And at that point, liberals will rebrand themselves and say, oh, we were always against this all along. Just look at the genocide in Bosnia. It was liberals who imposed the arms embargo that allowed for the genocide of the Bosniak people. So while the Croats and the Serbs and others all had arms already, they were wantonly doing killing. But it was the Bosniaks ultimately who couldn't get any arms because the arms embargo was imposed. And afterwards, when everyone was dead, they came in at the end and said, oh, how terrible this was, when we always against this from the very beginning.
And it's interesting, they only describe Srebrenica as a genocide.
Right.
But over 200,000 Bosniaks were killed.
Of course, absolutely. Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, because of racism. We come back to the same thing that we began with. And of course, Bosniaks are white. I've been, I'm sure you have as well, to Bosnia. They just look in many ways like any other white person in Europe. But there is that element of racialization through their faith, which is exactly what happened. I've met so many Bosniaks who have told me that, we were best friends with these people. One guy told me that his sister was the girlfriend of a Serb whose house was behind their house. That's how close they were. All best friends. They would go out drinking together. They would do a party together. They would do all sorts of things together. When the genocide began, On the first day, the Serb turned up at their house with a machine gun and shot at the entire house. This is how racialization works as a process. And so, what's happening in Gaza right now, we've seen it happen before, but it's happening live streamed in front of us from the first time. And that's what makes it different. But I also think that's what makes it so powerful in terms of international movement building. We are seeing something for the first time. And we're seeing people taking risks for the first time in ways that they hadn't done before. And I think Palestine Action is a really great example of that. I go with my wife to visit some of the young sisters who are imprisoned right now for being involved in Palestine Action. And the level of conscience that these young women have, they're all in the early 20s. They're like so amazing. But they have this pure dedication to the fact that, whatever they're alleged to have done, that they did it for the sake of Palestine. And that no matter how many degrees they might have received, if they had not done the action, like what their life might have been like, they're like, none of that matters. None of that matters. There is a genocide taking place. There are drones that need to be stopped, and we stop those drones from getting to Gaza. And so hopefully, even if we didn't stop lives being taken, at least we delayed those lives being taken. I think that's truly an incredible thing. And that's the kind of thing that I think most people should be thinking about. Like, how do we leverage the positions that we're in to stop this genocide? Because it is live streamed, because we are being forced to watch it, and therefore it carries obligations towards us.
And are these members of the Filton 18?
That's correct, yeah.
Could you just tell us a bit more about the Filton 18?
So yeah, the Filton 18 were a group that effectively went into the Filton factory of Elbit Systems. They broke into it and they smashed up the drones and the quadcopters that were in at that site. Unlike many others, the Filton 18 had been held on remand after they were arrested. So there's 3 different groups of them who will have trials at different dates, but all of them would have been in prison on remand for 2 years before they even get to trial.
Wow.
Which is disgusting. They do not pose a risk, to society. The only, group that they pose a risk to is Elbit Systems, and I don't know why the police are so invested in protecting Elbit Systems. Clearly, an organization that is, involved in this genocide.
It speaks to the role of the police.
It speaks to the role of the police, absolutely. And we know that the police has always been the violent arm of colonial machinery since its inception up until the present day. The police don't have their own politics. They are a reflection of the politics of their government. And so when we see the police repressing and suppressing Palestinian activism in particular over anyone else, we know exactly what orders they're being given and where their politics lie. And the politics of the police will always be with our oppressors and never with the dispossessed.
Returning to the Filton 18.
Yeah.
You're saying they're in prison for 2 years before trial.
Yes.
And they are facing terrorism charges, right?
They're not facing terrorism charges. They're facing criminal damage charges. Okay. But what the government did, what the prosecution have done, is that they've said that there is a terrorism element involved in their case. Wow. So now what happens, and this is a tactic that they've used from America. In America, you have something called a terrorism enhancer for sentencing. So the case will be a completely normal case. So for example, one man, a Lebanese man, Mohammed Hamoud, I believe his name was, his case from many, many, many years ago. He was transporting tobacco across state lines in order to get tax relief, but this is illegal in the way that he was doing it. They said that he gave, I think it was less than $500 to a armed militia group in Lebanon, and we're talking about like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in relation to the tax issue that he had. So at sentencing, so even though his case had nothing to do with terrorism, at sentencing, the FBI presents this evidence, can't even call it evidence, an allegation that there was some terrorism element with some money that he sent. And his sentence went from 5 years to 150 years.
Wow.
It was increased by, just because of this one little small thing. Okay? Now they brought that over here. So what they do is that they don't use terrorism in the law itself, in the charges, because it's not a terrorism case. But when sentencing will take place, what they will do is they'll say to the judge that, hey, when you sentence these guys, there's this terrorism element that we would like you to consider in order to enhance their sentence.
How do they even expect that this would work? Like, it's surely in a sane society with a functioning legal system, these claims would be dismissed outright as bogus.
I think you said it though, didn't you? In a sane society, I think that's a problem, that we have a system of laws that is so highly racialized that that assumes that judges will play their role, that prosecutors will play their role in order to maintain this hyper criminalization. That's worked. The war on terror is evidence of that it has worked. You know, let's talk about common sense. Common sense would tell you that terrorism laws are used in order to prosecute people who are involved in violent political violence acts. That's what a sensible person would think, and inshallah, we're sensible people. You would be wrong. When actual violence takes place, they use the Foreign Explosives Act and the Offences Against Persons Act, which are older pieces of criminal law legislation. Terrorism laws are used, here's the kicker, predominantly where there is no violence involved.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, most people don't know this, right? So all these statistics that you see about the number of charges and convictions for terrorism, the vast majority are for non-violent offences. Vast majority, like 90%. They're for things like reading the wrong publication, or being stopped at an airport and refusing to give passwords to your devices, and many other like kind of inane crimes like that. Okay, so when we talk about terrorism, the way that terrorism laws are used, what we're talking about is a system of extreme repression and racial violence. That's what we're talking about. And that's how they're using this legislation in order to inhibit our ability to support resistance movements around the world, to support the end of a genocide that is taking place. That is really what's at stake here, which is why we should actually push back against terrorism laws themselves and call for the complete abolition of terrorism laws. Not just say, well, this group aren't terrorists, but you should still keep the terrorism laws in place. And the entire system and structure is broken.
So it's draconian in its nature.
Absolutely draconian.
What would you say is the best way to help those who have put themselves on the line and are currently facing charges?
So right now, of course, Palestine Action is not a prescribed organization, and I really believe that everyone should play a role in relation to Palestine Action. For me, it's the most important organization in the entirety of the Western world, right? I say that belonging to an organization that I work for and, very much believe in our own actions, right? But always I direct people. So you can play a number of roles. Get involved in an action yourself before it becomes prescribed if you can. Be a support line for the actionists. Be a support line for the political prisoners. Write to them. Be a support line for the families. Help the families in any way that you can, right? Turn up to protests. There's a protest happening for the Filton 18 on the 30th June and the 1st of July outside Woolwich Crown Court. I hope many people will be there, inshallah. I think we need presence to show our solidarity for the Filton 18. So that's really essential, that Palestine Action are seen to be supported. If they are prescribed, then we pivot towards supporting direct action generally as a mechanism of support. But right now, one thing that everyone can do is that there is a documentary called To Kill a War Machine that is being put online. It only costs £12 to download it and watch it. I've seen this documentary. It's one of the most powerful documentaries that you will ever see. And it's about the work of Palestine Action and Filton 18. Highly, highly recommended. So, you can go on the To Kill a War Machine's website and pay for and watch the documentary. It's excellent.
I want to hone in on this one particular point, which is how these prescription laws will affect those who aren't directly related or directly part of Palestine Action. Because you've mentioned this a couple of times, the showing of support for such an organization now also becomes criminalized.
If they are prescribed,
If
yes.
they're prescribed.
Yes, you can't express support. So you couldn't go out there and say that I love Palestine Action. That would be a criminal offense to do so. You wouldn't be able to say that I express my solidarity towards Palestine Action even. That would again be a criminal offense. If they are proscribed, and I believe they've already got a very good legal team in place, then of course an application will be put to the Home Secretary in order to deproscribe them. But that will take some time, like the current case that we have. So there's two applications right now before the Home Secretary for Hamas, one by Riverway Law and one by Cage International. And those two applications are going through as we speak. And so Palestine Action will have to go through a similar process.